I can still feel the sting of that evening, like a bruise that refuses to fade. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner, nothing special, just a chance to sit together and share a meal. But what happened at that table left me feeling smaller than I've ever felt in my own home. I remember the sound of laughter echoing around the dining room. Plates clattered, wine glasses chimed, and yet there I sat, invisible in the middle of it all. My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the noise, sharp and dismissive, as if I were a burden rather than a mother and grandmother. She brushed aside my words with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, making a joke at my expense. And the worst part? My son sat right there beside her, his eyes fixed on his plate, refusing to meet mine. Not a word in my defense, not even a glance. The humiliation spread through me, hot and bitter. I could feel my face burn as the others chuckled politely, pretending not to notice how deeply those careless remarks had cut me. In that moment, I wasn't the woman who had built this family, who had sacrificed years of her life to hold everything together. I was reduced to nothing more than a punchline. Loneliness is a strange thing. You can be surrounded by people you love and still feel completely alone. That night, I felt like a ghost haunting my own family, watching them live their lives as if I had no place in it. But pain has a way of stirring memories. As I sat there in silence, holding back tears, I began to think of everything that had led to this point, the years of giving, the sacrifices no one seemed to remember. And that's where the real story begins. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how many years of my life quietly disappeared in service to my family. I can still see the mornings when I woke before sunrise, ironing shirts for school, packing lunches with little notes tucked inside, and whispering encouragement to a sleepy boy who didn't yet realize how much I believed in him. Every parent sacrifices, but I gave everything: my time, my energy, my youth, because I wanted my son to have a life filled with opportunities I never had. I was there for every scraped knee, every science project, every heartbreak he didn't know how to put into words. And later, when he graduated college, I was the proudest mother alive, clapping until my hands stung. I thought those years of devotion meant something, that they had carved out a permanent place for me in his heart. But life has a cruel way of shifting. As my son built his career, he met Vanessa. On the surface, she was polished and graceful, the kind of woman who charmed strangers at parties and seemed to know exactly how to impress. She had a way of filling the room, of speaking just loudly enough that no one else's voice mattered. To others, she looked like the perfect wife, elegant, ambitious, confident. But beneath that sheen, I saw edges sharp enough to cut. It wasn't obvious at first. She began with small gestures, gently guiding conversations, steering decisions in her favor. Slowly, the warmth of family dinners gave way to her carefully curated performances, where every detail was meant to elevate her image. And somewhere in that process, I stopped being a mother-in-law and became something else entirely, a background prop in her perfect picture. What hurt most was the way my son seemed blind to it all, content to let her lead, even when it meant leaving me behind. The ache of being overlooked was painful enough, but I had no idea that the disregard would soon spill into something far worse. The emotional distance was only the beginning. What came next reached into my very sense of trust and my finances. It began so subtly that I almost convinced myself it was harmless. One afternoon, my son leaned across my kitchen table and spoke gently. the way he always did when he needed something. He suggested that I add Vanessa as an authorized user on my credit card just for emergencies, he said. He painted it as practical, a way to make sure their little boy never went without if something unexpected happened. The words sounded reasonable, even thoughtful, and I wanted harmony, so I agreed. At first, everything seemed fine. A new pair of shoes for my grandson, a doctor's visit, school supplies, all things I could understand. I remember reading those early statements and feeling almost relieved, thinking maybe this was a small way to help. I told myself that this was what family did, leaning on each other when times were tight. But little by little, the charges changed. The neat rows of necessities gave way to indulgences. A spa package under Vanessa's name. Dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. Designer items that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Each statement felt heavier in my hands, the numbers climbing higher while my trust sank lower. I tried to reason with myself. She was tired. She deserved a break. They worked hard. Maybe they needed a night out. But deep down, a quiet voice inside me knew I was being used. Every swipe of that card wasn't about family needs. It was about Vanessa's wants. The realization hit like a cold wind. My years of sacrifice had been twisted into an open account for her convenience. What hurt most wasn't the money itself, but the betrayal that came with it. My kindness had been taken for granted, turned into entitlement. I sat alone at my table one evening. Statements spread out before me, and for the first time, I admitted the truth to myself. This wasn't help. This was exploitation. And though I stayed silent on the outside, inside a new resolve was forming. I would not let this continue forever. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening, during what was supposed to be a simple family get-together. I had spent the day preparing a dish I used to make when my son was little, his favorite, the one that always made him smile. I carried it to the table with quiet pride, hoping it might remind him of home, of me. But before I could even set it down, Vanessa's laughter cut across the room. She made some offhand remark about how old-fashioned my cooking was, how it was time to leave those recipes in the past. The words weren't just careless, they were sharpened, designed to pierce. The people around the table chuckled nervously, unsure whether to follow her lead. My son sat there, eyes downcast, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. Not a word in my defense. The sting of that silence hurt more than her words. It was as if I had been erased right there in front of everyone, reduced to nothing more than an outdated relic in my own family. I felt the heat rise in my face as I forced myself to swallow back the hurt. I smiled faintly, pretending it didn't matter, but inside, something broke. As the evening went on, she continued with her little jabs, comments about how I must be lonely, hints that I wasn't capable of keeping up with modern life. Each word chipped away at me while my son sat quietly, complicit in his silence. By the time the plates were cleared, the humiliation had settled deep in my chest. But beneath that ache, another feeling stirred, something fiercer, heavier, unshakable. Fury. Yes, but also resolve. I realized that night that if I didn't stand for myself, no one else would. So I smiled, cleared the dishes, and said nothing. But inside, I was already planning. This would be the last time I allowed myself to be mocked and diminished in front of the people I loved. The fire had been lit. After that night, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope things would change. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. So I started small, quietly going through my bank statements, lining them up on the kitchen table in neat rows. I wanted to believe it was only a handful of indulgences, maybe thoughtless spending that had gotten out of control. But with every page, the reality grew darker. Charges stacked one after another, luxury boutiques, high-end restaurants, weekend getaways I was never told about. There were transactions from places across the state resorts I had never set foot in. The numbers told a story more honest than any words ever could. What I had dismissed as a few careless purchases had ballooned into tens of thousands drained from my accounts. The pit in my stomach grew heavy as I traced the pattern. This wasn't an accident. It was systematic, deliberate, and done with the assumption that I would never notice, or worse, that I would never dare to confront it. I reached out to an old friend who worked as an accountant, someone I trusted to be discreet. Sitting across from her in her quiet office, I watched her eyes widen as she scanned the records. She didn't need to say much. Her silence told me everything. This was financial abuse, plain and simple. And walking out of that meeting, I felt strangely calm. The heartbreak that had weighed me down began to shift into something steadier, sharper. I had proof now. Proof that my kindness had been taken and twisted. Proof that I was being used. That night, I sat in my living room with the papers spread across the coffee table. The shame I had carried turned into determination. I decided then and there I would no longer be their silent victim. The next time we sat at a table together, the conversation would not go the way they expected. Once I had the evidence in my hands, I knew what I had to do. There was no point in arguing behind closed doors. No chance of being heard if it was just the three of us. Vanessa would twist my words. My son would avoid confrontation. And I would once again be silenced. No, this time, everything needed to be out in the open. So I called and invited them to dinner. My voice was calm, steady, even cheerful. I told them I wanted us all together for a nice meal, just the way we used to do. Vanessa sounded pleased, maybe even smug, as if she believed I was extending an olive branch. My son seemed relieved, too, probably hoping this meant I was ready to move on. If only they knew what was waiting for them. In the days leading up to that dinner, I prepared in ways no one could see. I sorted every bank statement, every credit card bill, every receipt into neatly labeled folders. I highlighted charges that spoke louder than any words I could ever say. Luxury handbags, spa retreats, endless nights out, all bought with money they told me was for emergencies. I wanted the truth to be undeniable, impossible to excuse. I set the table with care the night they were due to arrive, placing the plates evenly, folding the napkins just so. To them, it would look like nothing more than a thoughtful gesture. But to me, it was a stage being set. I lit a single candle in the center, its flicker soft against the papers stacked quietly in my side drawer, waiting to be unveiled. On the outside, I smiled, stirred the pot on the stove, poured the wine. But beneath that calm exterior, a storm rumbled, one I had been holding back for far too long. By the end of that dinner, the silence that had once protected them would no longer protect them at all. The evening began like any other. The clinking of silverware, the polite chatter, the way Vanessa always dominated the conversation with stories polished for effect. My son sat across from me, nodding along as if everything was perfectly normal. To them, it was just another family dinner. To me, it was the moment I had been preparing for. I waited until the plates were half empty, until the laughter softened into casual murmurs. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steady when I finally spoke. I told them there was something we needed to discuss, something I could no longer ignore. The room fell quiet. Forks paused mid-air. I rose from my chair and walked to the side drawer where the folders waited. My hands didn't shake as I placed the stack on the table and slid the top one toward Vanessa. Page after page of highlighted transactions stared back at her charges for designer handbags, luxury resorts, and spa packages, all under her name. For a long moment, she just stared, her smile faltering, the color draining from her face. My son glanced down, confusion shifting quickly into alarm as he realized what he was looking at. I explained, calmly, that these were not emergencies, these were indulgences, funded by the trust I had placed in them. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Vanessa tried to laugh it off, to suggest it was a misunderstanding, but the numbers spoke louder than her excuses. My son shuffled through the pages, his jaw tightening with every line he read. Then came the twist I had kept for last. I revealed the hidden account I had discovered, the one Vanessa had used to funnel even more of my money away. Vacations, home renovations, things I hadn't even known about. My voice stayed even, but the weight of truth filled the room like thunder. The candlelight flickered over their stunned faces. Shame settled over my son. Outrage flashed in Vanessa's eyes. But I didn't waver. For the first time in years, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked figure at the table. I was the one holding the truth, the one forcing them to see what they had done. And as I sat back down, the papers spread before us. I felt the balance shift. They could no longer hide behind silence. The silence after my revelation was thick, like the air before a storm breaks. Vanessa was the first to recover, leaning back in her chair with a practiced sigh. She reached for her usual trick soft smiles, careful words, the performance of being misunderstood. She said I was imagining things, that families didn't keep score, that perhaps I was too sensitive. Her voice carried the same sweetness she used at parties, the kind that made others bend without realizing they had. But I had bent long enough. I let her speak, watching her weave excuses, waiting for my son to intervene. He didn't. His eyes stayed fixed on the evidence, shame heavy in his silence. And so I did what I should have done long ago. I answered with calm clarity. I told her that generosity had been mistaken for weakness, and trust had been treated like a free account to raid. I explained that love and loyalty didn't excuse exploitation, and that I would no longer carry the cost of her entitlement. Her smile cracked. She tried again, this time with guilt. She painted herself as the one holding the family together, suggesting I should be grateful for her presence. I could almost see the strings she tried to pull, the familiar web of manipulation. But instead of getting caught, I cut through it. I reminded her and my son that family is about respect, not convenience, and that my years of sacrifice didn't make me a servant. For the first time, Vanessa had no response. The silence was no longer mine to bear. It belonged to them. I sat straighter, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I felt composed, resolute, and strangely compassionate. I wasn't there to destroy them. I was there to reclaim myself. And as I looked at the two of them, stunned by a power shift they hadn't expected, I knew the years of being diminished were finally over. In the days after that dinner, My house felt quieter than it had in years. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace. For the first time in a long while, I could sit in my living room without the weight of unspoken pain pressing against my chest. The folders of evidence were still tucked away neatly in my desk, but I no longer needed to stare at them. The truth had been spoken, and it could never be taken back. My son came to me not long after, his voice heavy with regret. He admitted he had looked the other way for too long, choosing comfort over confrontation, and that his silence had wounded me as much as Vanessa's words and actions ever did. It was not an easy conversation, but it was an honest one. For once, he did not defend her or minimize what had happened. He listened, and for me, that was a start. As for Vanessa, her demeanor toward me shifted. She was quieter, less bold, no longer so quick to dismiss me. I don't know if it was respect or simply fear of being caught again, but either way, the constant jabs and manipulations came to a halt. And in that stillness, I realized I no longer needed her approval or anyone's to feel secure in my place as a mother, a woman, and a person worthy of dignity. I took back full control of my finances. I closed accounts, changed passwords, spoke to my bank, and ensured that no one else had access to what I had worked for. It was empowering to see those small steps add up to something bigger, a renewed sense of independence. A reminder that my years of sacrifice had not made me powerless. If anything, they had made me strong enough to stand my ground. The greatest lesson I took from all of this is that love and loyalty are not meant to cost you your self-respect. It is possible to be giving without being taken for granted. And it is possible to set boundaries without losing the heart of who you are. For so long, I thought keeping quiet was a way of keeping peace. But silence doesn't create peace. It only protects the people who hurt you. True peace comes when you decide that you deserve better, and you're willing to act on that truth. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I share it because I know there are others out there, parents, grandparents, friends who have felt invisible in their own families, who have been made to feel small after giving so much. To you, I say this: you are not alone, and you are not powerless. Boundaries are not walls to shut others out. They are doors that allow respect and love to enter in the right way. Looking back now, I don't regret the confrontation. It was painful, yes, but it was necessary. That night at the dinner table was the moment I stopped being a background figure in my own life and reclaimed my voice. And though the road ahead may not be perfect, it is mine to walk with dignity, with strength, and with hope. If you've ever faced something similar, if you've been taken for granted or made to feel invisible, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments, because your voice matters. And if this story resonated with you, consider liking or sharing it. Sometimes the simple act of speaking out is the first step toward change. Because in the end, respect isn't something we beg for, it's something we claim by choosing to no longer accept less than what we deserve.